going to go back to the last 4 lines, or is it 5 lines? 5 lines of Chesam at the base. That's where we're going to start from. So it's 18b. In the article, it's 18b5, because that's the beginning of a section. So,
Okay.
yeah, that I would like to just go over that. I don't want to rush it. I want to kind of make sure that I understand it, and hopefully everybody else will do it in collaboration together. Because these things are things that we don't usually engage in every single day.
So what does it start with, the line?
The line starts with Haruach, but we're going to do Toner Rabbanan Alet Al Yodav.
Well, okay, it's on the bottom of my page on the steins.
No problem. I'll just tell everybody else that this is what we're doing.
Yitkaven Yadav Tehora. Okay.
That's right. Now, Hanoit Al Yodav and Niskaven, yeah, that's where we're going to start from. Okay. Just give it a few more minutes for other people to arrive. And, of course, if there are any questions or any comments from yesterday's Gemara that anybody wants to talk about or ask about, feel free to do that. But, as I said, I'm going to go over some of yesterday's Gemara. I'm going to start from 18b5 in the art scroll. That's the last 5 lines of the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, 18b. That's where we're going to start from.
I think the biggest issue there is nitkaven or lo nitkaven.
Well, yes, but I think what's important is to realize what case we're speaking about. I think that a lot of things are being said, and while we're busy saying them, we're not paying attention. Which case are we saying that you have to have in mind, and which case are we saying you don't have to have in mind? Because we need to realize that there's a difference between whether we're talking about the Rabbanon, whether we're talking about the Eraisa, whether we're talking about Chulin, whether we're talking about Maisa and Truma, and so on. And so therefore, as we discuss each thing, it's important to kind of have everything in its right place. So so that's what I'd like to kind of go through today. Right, like one of the things I made a note for myself here to mention is, I'll do it as it comes up, but there's important things to bear in mind as we go through some issues, okay? Because it's very easy to generalize, right? That's what we all do all day, is we generalize. Otherwise, we'd never be able to function as normal human beings. We have to generalize to be able to move along. But sometimes you run into trouble when you generalize and you don't check yourself to make sure that it actually applies in all cases. So that's what I hope to kind of slow down a little bit and try to untangle these things. Anyway, Be'ez Hashem, that's my hope. That's my hope. Okay. We'll just wait another second just to see if Ezra's going to join us, but otherwise we're going to get
started. Morning, Robert, I see.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ben.
All right, let's start. We're starting from Toner Rabbanan, right? Toner Rabbanan, the rabbis told in the Brisa. Everybody have it? Yes, this is Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, 18b5 in the art scroll. Toner Rabbanan, the rabbis told in the Brisa. Hanoit El Yodov, somebody who washes their hands. Niskaven, if he had intention to wash his hands, then we say Yodov Tahirois, then his hands are Tahor. Lo Niskaven, but if he did not have intention to wash his hands, when he had his hands, when he washed his hands, he didn't have intention for it to be bringing Tahara, then Yodov Tameis, his hands remain impure. Likewise, so to somebody who immerses their hands into a mikvah for the purpose of becoming tahar, right? So we say niskav. When I say for the purpose, let's just leave it neutral for a minute. He immerses his hands, niskav in yodov. If he has intention for tahara, then tahiris. Niskavin, if he had in mind the yodov tahiris, then his hands are tahar. Lay niskavin, if he did not have intention that they should become tahar, then yodov tameis, then his hands remain tamei, right? And he would have to wash them again with intention. So that seems to be saying clearly that a person does not that needs to have intention when he washes his hands.
Is it enough? Is it enough just to think about it, or does he have to say the blessing of washing hands?
No, we're just talking about without a blessing at the moment. We're not talking about the blessing at the moment. And in general, it's important to know that brachos are not ma'akvos, which means if a person does a mitzvah and he didn't make a bracha, he still fulfilled the mitzvah. It's important to make a bracha, but it doesn't invalidate the mitzvah if he didn't make a bracha. I had an interesting experience. I did, for many years, I was dealing with Jewish people who have embraced Christianity, and some of them are missionaries. And I would try to engage with them and try to bring them back closer to Yiddishkeit. So one of the things I would do is I'd offer them to put on tefillin. So there was a particular missionary, a very big missionary, and I offered him to put on tefillin. And he said, sure. But then, because he's a little bit knowledgeable, he said, well, I'm not so comfortable with the blessing, because the blessing says that Hashem commanded us, right? And he doesn't believe that it's command, the whole thing. So he wants to change the bracha. So I said, listen, you don't have to make a bracha. Let's just put it on without a bracha. And my reasoning is because there's a rule when it comes to the way the rabbis coined or minted something. One should never change from the way they set something up. If they set up a bracha to be made in a certain way, we shouldn't come and change it. At the same time, there's a principle that brachas are not ma'akvis. Brachas don't invalidate the mitzvah. So I said, let's just put on the tefillin without making a bracha. And that's what I did. I put on tefillin with him without making a bracha. So it's important to say that, when we wash our hands, we do need to make a bracha, but we're not speaking about the bracha now, and the bracha wouldn't, not making a bracha wouldn't invalidate the person's hand washing. Okay, it would still be valid if he had intention according to this brisa. But now the Gemara challenges this with another brisa. It says, "Well, Tanya, was it not taught in a different brisa? Bein niskavin, bein loin niskavin, whether a person had intention or whether he did not have intention, yodov tahiros, his hands are going to be tahar," which seems to say that if a person washes their hands without intention, it still is valid. So it seems to be a contradiction. And for the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Nachman says, Loi kasha, it's not a question. Why? Because the two different brises are talking about two different cases. Kan lechulin. Here in the second brisa, the person who washed his hands was washing his hands for chulin. And for chulin, it's not so stringent. Therefore, the rabbis didn't make a decree that you have to have in mind, an extra stringency that you have to have in mind. They didn't do that. However, Kan, in the brisa that says that if you had in mind, it's good. If you didn't have in mind, then it's not valid. That's Kan Lamaisa. That's for with regards to Maisa Sheni. There, because it's a little bit of a higher degree of Kedusha, they did institute an enactment that a person who didn't have in mind, it's not going to count when he washes without intention. Okay. What do we have from here? We have a resolution that chulin does not need intention. When you wash your hands for chulin, you do not need to have any kavana. Okay? It still counts. Frag the Gemara, Temron, the chulin lebo kavana. We're now at the top of Daf Yutes Amud Aleph. So the Gemara is asking, from where do we know to say that chulin does not require intention? Meaning to say, when you wash, that you don't need to have intention when you're washing. And for the Gemara, the Tanan, because we've learned in the Mishnah, and this is going to be the source that we're going to try to suggest, is from where we learn that you don't need to have intention when it comes to chulin. Because we say, here's the instance, Gal shenitlash, if a wave became detached from the sea, uboy arboim saw, and it has within it has 40 saw together. Now, manof al ha'odam, and it fell on a person, va'ala kelim, and on utensils. So, if this happens, what is the law with regards to the person and utensils? Says the Mishnah, says says the Mishnah, tahirin, they become tahor. So what do we see from here? We see from here, right, that this wave, which due to the storm detached itself from the sea, came crashing down on the man, and on the kalim they become tar. That would seem to indicate that you do not need to have any intention. The Gemara tries to finish the reasoning, right? Katani odom dumi the kalim. The Mishnah teaches the case of the person parallel to the case of the utensils. And by grouping them together, what we're trying to indicate is that they're similar. So now, ma kelim d'lo mechavni, just as utensils, right, do not intend to immerse themselves because they have no kavana at all, right? So too, av adam lo mechavin. So too, a person does also not intend to immerse himself in this particular case, because we're talking about a freak case where the wave detached itself from the rest of the sea. So just like the kalim didn't have any intention, so too the man didn't have any intention, and nevertheless the tar. And this would be a good proof to determine that, to tell us and establish that when it comes to chulin, you do not need to have any kavana when it comes to the washing your hands. Right? The Gemara, umimai, how do you know this? Who says that this is exactly what the Mishnah is trying to teach us? Maybe the case is a unique case. Maybe the person is sitting and he's anticipating and waiting. When will this wave detach itself? In other words, he sees that it's a stormy day. He sees that there's going to be big waves and there's a big tide and so on and so forth. So he sits there on the side waiting for the moment when this is going to come crashing down. And so therefore, askinon, that's what our Mishnah is talking about. And this that you say, that you put together the kalim and the person, the two cases about the utensils and the person, it's not that we should learn the person from the state of the kalim, that the kalim, the vessels, didn't have intention, so too the person didn't have intention, but the other way around. It's the kalim dumi the adam. It's the utensils we're paralleling and comparing to the person. Ma adam dvar kavana, just like the person who is capable of intent and he requires intent. And we're talking about a case where he's waiting for this wave to detach itself and come crashing on him. So therefore the Mishnah puts next to it the case of the kalim to tell us that the owner of the kalim also has to have intent for them to become tahor. Now, this would serve as a challenge to using this as a source to tell me that when it comes to chulin, you do not have to have any, you do not need to have intention. You're going to say, if that's the case, there's no need for the Mishnah, because if you're telling me that a wave that comes crashing down on somebody who's waiting for it to come crashing down, it works as a tahara, it works as purification, this should seemingly be obvious because he's immersed himself in 40 saw, and that's enough. So what's the Mishnah coming to tell me with this Mishnah? In other words, according to our suggestion that our Mishnah, this Mishnah over here, serves as a source to learn out that chulin doesn't need to have any intention, then it's very good to have this Mishnah because that's the Chiddush. So this is what the Gemara asks. And if you're going to answer and ask, but if the Mishnah is only talking about a person who's sitting and anticipating, in which case there's no Chiddush over here about a person being able to become tahor even if he didn't have kavanah. So then, Ma'ila Memra, what's the Mishnah here for to teach us? What kind of chiddush is there?
I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, I wanted to ask, I don't have an idea what the wave of 40 saw would look like. Because from the picture, it looks like it will hurt you.
Okay.
A wave like that can hurt you.
Hurt you?
It can hurt you. You cannot sit there and wait for a wave like that because it can kill you, or it can hit the pots that you want to kosher in your head. You know, it's not a safe thing that you're sitting and waiting for.
Well, we're talking about somebody who's sitting at the edge of the water. He's on dry land, right?
Right. But he's expecting a wave to hit him.
Correct. Now, this wave is going to be a wave that hits it. It's not really a tsunami per se, but it's a big wave, right? And we're expecting that when it hits him and it comes down and it hits him, it's going to go back into the water. And it's I don't know. I wouldn't consider it necessarily dangerous. I mean, I wouldn't try this.
But it looks like it's going to be higher than you.
Of course, it's going to be higher than you. Yeah, of course.
It's going to go over you.
It's going to go over you and then come landing on you.
Yeah, it's extremely dangerous.
Okay. I mean, those who enjoy these kind of water
I've been
sports,
sitting on the beach. I know what it means.
right? No, but people who enjoy these kinds of water sports wouldn't have a problem with it.
No, not sitting with things in your metal things in your hands. You know, trying to kosher them.
No, I understand that.
Anyhow, I just wanted to know what the extent of the wave is.
I'll tell you an interesting principle. When it comes to Gemara, the Gemara wants to try and bring you the most extreme cases. And the reason why we want to bring you the most extreme cases is to be able to extrapolate from them into less severe cases. So therefore, if I were to come and talk about something which is very, very common, then I would never be able to learn out from that common case for a case that is a little bit more extreme and out of the ordinary. So therefore, what I do is I go to the furthest extreme, right? And talk about something which is really out of the ordinary. And when I come along and I say, in such an extreme case, it's still kosher, then I can imagine and learn from there that even in lesser cases, right, less extreme cases, it's going to be kosher. So it's true. Maybe, I don't know, but let's just say, for argument's sake, it is dangerous to be there. But we're saying that the guy was there, whether it was dangerous or not, he was there. The question is, halachically, did he become tahor or did he not become tahor? Right? Okay. So going back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, so then why would I need this Mishnah if you're telling me that the person was there waiting for the wave to come crashing down on him, which means that he had intention. So you could never learn anything from here with regards to when a person didn't have intention. So then what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? So he says the chiddush is Sal Kedai Tachamina. I might have thought that Ligzo, we should make a special gezerah, special decree. Maybe a person will come to perform an immersion in a torrent of rainwater that's coming down a steep mountain slope, which that is in fact asur. Why is that asur? And why is this one mutter? So let me just explain to you something about mikvahs. Number one, a mikvah needs to be on the ground. Okay, generally speaking, a mikvah needs to be on the ground. And when we say it's on the ground, it has to have 40 sa'ah, right? That's the measurement that's required in one place. It cannot be flowing. It cannot be zoichelin. If you have, for example, a mikveh that is not properly insulated and water is escaping and it's flowing, then that mikveh is not a kosher mikveh, and somebody who immerses into that mikveh has not become pure, even if there's the right amount of water, but because it's not staying in one place, it keeps flowing out, it's not considered a kosher mikveh. So now, when it comes to this big wave that comes crashing down, that has separated itself from the sea. Why is that considered to be still kosher? Because there's an exception to this rule, and that is when we speak about a mayon. A mayon is a wellspring. And so what we'll say is that this water that detaches itself from the ocean and comes crashing down on the person on the side of the ocean, right, has the din of a mayon, and therefore, even though it's flowing down on him, right, nevertheless, we consider it to be a good mikvah, and it does provide him with tahara. However, when it comes to water that's from rainwater has to be collected into one body of water, right? And if it's flowing, it's not going to count. So now we're saying the reason why our Mishnah is telling us that when this big wave comes crashing down on you, that it's still good and it's still valid, is because you might think that we should make a decree not to allow the person to consider this valid, lest he come to assume that in the case of rainwater, a torrent of rainwater that's coming down on a mountain slope, right, which will come on a very deep slope and pour over him, he might think, oh, I've just immersed myself by having all this rainwater come on me. And we know that in the case of the mountain and the rainwater, it's not kosher. So maybe I should come along. Maybe I should come along and make a special decree to say that in the case of the wave, it's not going to be valid. So therefore, the Mishnah came along and told us, no, we don't make that gzera. Inami. Alternatively, another reason that we could have this Mishnah and still have a Chiddush, even though it's not talking about somebody who did not have Kavanah, he says, because maybe we would think about making another Gezerah. What's that? Nigzar Roshin Atu Kefin. That maybe we should decree that it should be an invalid immersion in the heads of the detached waves on account of the immersion in their arches. What that means is as follows. The only way you can come along and have a valid tevila, so to speak, receive tahara, is when the heads, which means the bottom of the water that's coming down, actually comes down and hits you, right? However, while the water is still up in the air, if I were to take some vessels and throw it into that arch, okay, and hit the water in that arch, right? Would you consider that to be valid? So we say, no, it's not valid. We're going to see why not. But we say that if it's in the arches, the water in the arches that you throw kalim up into before they come down in and hit the floor, that is not going to be valid, right? So therefore, I might think like this. If I'm going to let the guy stand there on the floor, waiting for the wave to come crashing down, he might think, if this wave is good enough to hit me, when it hits me, maybe it's good enough for me to throw kalim up to it, and then it'll be a valid immersion of those kalim. But the truth is, it's not a valid immersion of the kalim, because we say the arches do not count for the mikvah while they're up in the air. Frank the Gemara, 1 second. Oh, what's that? The Gemara says, that's why the Tana of the Mishnah teaches us this Mishnah to inform us that we don't make a decree. In other words, we're not coming to tell you that a person is tahar even if he doesn't have in mind, because this case is talking about somebody who does have in mind. But we're coming to tell you that it's still valid, even though you could think that we should make a special decree not to allow this in the first instance, because you might come to make a conclusion that in a different case, which looks similar to this, it would be kosher. So we say we don't make such a gzera. But 1 second, you're telling me in the second suggestion, where the gzera would be that you would disallow the bottom of the water that comes down to make you pure, because you might throw up things into the arch and that would become valid. How do I know that if I throw something into the arch, it's invalid? Where do you get that from? That's what the Gemara asks now. From where do we know that you're not allowed to perform an immersion in the arches of a detached wave, that you cannot take kalim, for example, and throw it up into the arch of the wave? The Tanya, because we have a brisa that says you can immerse utensils in the rushing, which means the wave that comes down. But you cannot immerse them into the arches. And it gives the reason, because one cannot perform an immersion in the mid-air. The mikvah has to be on the floor. So it's only when a person is standing on the floor and the water comes crashing down on him, right? So we say that once it hits his head and he's touching the floor, it's considered like the mikvah, and that's fine. But to have a body of water in the air serve as a mikvah, that we don't allow. Okay, so now we're left with a problem. And that's the original problem. And the original problem is, where do we know that chulin doesn't require attention? You tried to bring me the example of the wave and say that the guy didn't have intention and nevertheless he becomes pure. We came back and we responded saying, no, it's talking about when he did have intention. So this is not a good source. This is not a good source to show that when a person washes his hands and he doesn't have intention for chulin, nevertheless, it's still good. So he says, the Gemara comes along and says, we learn it from a different source. What's the source? It's not learned in the Mishnah. It says as follows, peiros, fruit. Fell into a channel of water. Now, what do we do with the fruit? So, poshat mi sheyodov temeis unutalan. A guy whose hands were impure, he put it into the water to retrieve this fruit, right? So what is the status of his hands and what's the status of the fruit? So I explained yesterday that when it comes to this fruit can become impure only once they've been washed. Once they've become wet from one of 7 liquids, we said it's water, dew, blood, oil, milk, honey, and wine. So when a person puts the fruit into contact with any of these liquids, after that, it can become impure, okay? Now, we said with regards to this rule of how a fruit can become impure, that the rabbis say that it says in the pasuk, ki yutan. Yutan, when you spell it, Yud, Vav, Tov, Nun, right? And read it as Yutan, it sounds like it's water being placed automatically. So water was placed automatically, right? When water will have been placed on it, then it becomes Tameh. But because it's not spelt Yud, Vav, Tes, Tov, Nun, it's spelt Yud, Tov, Nun. And Yud, Tov, Nun, you can read as Yitain. Yitain is intentional putting. The rabbis learn from this that in order for any of these fruits to become, susceptible to tumah, it has to be intentional. In other words, the owner has to want it to become wet. So here we have a situation where a guy came, he sees the fruit in the water. Does he want it in the water? He doesn't want it in the water. Okay, so he puts his hands to retrieve it. So what's the law with his hands and what's the law with the fruit? His hands were originally tameh, but the water is enough to make the water is enough water there to make it tahar. He put his hands into this water to retrieve the fruit, and we say as follows: Yadav tahiris, his hands are tahar. Now let me ask you a question. When he put his hands in to get the fruit, did he have in mind that he wants his hands to become tahar? No, he didn't. He just put his hands
to get the fruit.
Just to get the fruit. And nevertheless, we say the halacha is that Yadav tahiris, his hands are pure. Or Paris, but what's the halacha with the Paris? Eina b'chiyutan. They are not included in the law of if water is placed, which means to say that they do not become susceptible to tumah yet, because he didn't want the fruit to become wet. Ve'im b'shvil sheyutchu yadav. Now the Mishnah brings a second possible scenario where if the guy if he put his hands in to get the fruit, but he did it in order to rinse his hands as well, right? In other words, he put his hands in to get the fruit, but also to become pure. Yod of Tahiris, his hands become tahor, and the peiros, the produce, are now included in bechiyutan, which means that they are susceptible to tumah. Why? Because he's happy that the fruit was in the water, because it gave him a reason to make his hands pure by putting them into the water. Do you understand? It's a little bit removed from the initial intention, but nevertheless, it's included in the intention. What I mean is, he's happy that the fruit were in the water because it gave him an opportunity to wash his hands. So in a sense, he's pleased with the fruit being in contact with the water, and therefore it does now become susceptible to tumah. But the main thing here is that the first ruling of the Mishnah indicates that the intent for purification when he puts his hand in the water was not necessary. So this can serve as a very good source to say that when it comes to chulin, it does count if a person didn't have in mind, but he rinsed his hands. Okay?
Rabbi?
Yes.
So his hands were not tahor. They became tahor when he dipped it in.
That's correct.
But the fruit coming out is susceptible to tumah, but he's not tameh.
In both cases, he's not going to be tameh. The only question is whether he had in mind when he put his hands into the water to become tahor. If he did have in mind, then because he's showing that he's pleased, that he's putting his hand in the water to retrieve the fruit, because he's happy that the fruit fell into the water, because now he's got an excuse to put his hands there and become tahor, so then the fruit also become susceptible to tumah. But if he didn't have any intention whatsoever other than to take the fruit out, then he's showing us that he's not happy that the fruit was in the water, and he didn't have any intention whatsoever to make his hands pure, but they do automatically become pure. And this can serve.
The fruit stays as it was. It doesn't change to tumah, and it doesn't change to tahor.
That's correct. When he had no intention other than to retrieve the fruit, then it does not become susceptible to tumah at that point.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get clear.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so now, 1 second. If that's the case, AC Rabba Rav Nachman. Rabba comes and challenges Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman is the one who brought us. 1 second. 1 second. No. So we're saying over here that from this Mishnah, we learn out that when it comes to chulin, you don't have to have intention when you rinse your hands. So now Rabbah is asking a question to Reb Nachman from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, not the Mishnah we just read, but our Mishnah, it says, Hatoiva l'chulin, somebody who immersed himself for chulin, v'huchsa, and he had in kavana, l'chulin, to purify himself for the level of chulin, also l'maisa, it's prohibited from eating maisa. But then we said, right, when we say that huchzak l'chulin, he had in mind for chulin, that's when it counts for chulin, but it doesn't count for maisa, it implies that it's only huchzak, meaning to say when he had the intention to be pure for chulin, that he becomes pure for chulin. So huchzak in, loy huchzak loy. It implies that if he intended to immerse himself to eat chulin, then he's permitted to do so because it's a valid immersion. But if he didn't, loy huchzak, if he didn't have intention to be immersing for chulin, right? Then he's not permitted to eat the chulin. That's what Rabbah is asking Rav Nachman. Now, 1 second. Seemingly, we've just shown clearly from the Mishnah that you don't have to have intention. You don't have to have in mind. We're shown from the Mishnah that you don't have to have in mind when you wash your hands, right? So then why would Rabbah come back and ask Rav Nachman the question again? So it seems that when we said that you don't have to have kavanah when you wash your hands. That's with regards to washing your hands. But it seems that Rav Nachman is asking whether that also would apply when a person is immersing, because there's going to perhaps be a difference between washing your hands for chulin or having a full immersion when it comes to chulin, right? So that's the question he's asking to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman, so the Gemara answers Rabbah. The Gemara answers Rabbah that you should know that when it says "Hatova lechulin v'huchzak lechulin," that it is permissible, this is how we should read it. Hachik Oma. We are holding Daf Yutes Amud Aleph, and it's about halfway down the page. So Hachik Oma. This is what the Tana is actually saying. Af al pi shehuchzak lechulin asal lemaisa. He's not saying that you need to have intention in order for it to be valid for chulin. He's saying that with regards to going up from the level of chulin which you had an intention for to the level of maisa, it's not going to work. Which means to say, even though when you went down into the mikvah, it's not as if you went to bathe there without any intention, but you went there for the specific purpose of becoming tahar. But since you only had in mind that it's going to qualify for chulin, it's not going to qualify for maisa. And so therefore, it's not really a contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah that we mentioned about the washing of, about the person who puts his hands to take out the fruit without having intention for his hands to become tahar. So now, if we continue to quote from our Mishnah, we have a further challenge. Esvei, Rabbah, challenge of Nachman. He says like this. It says in our Mishnah, Toval v'loy huchzak. What happens if a person went into the mikvah and he had no intention whatsoever? It seems to be that he only went in to bathe himself. He didn't have any intention of becoming pure at all. It happened to be a kosher mikvah, but he didn't have any intention at all. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, "Ki'ilu lo toval." It's as if he did not immerse himself. So Rabbah's asking Rav Nachman, "My love, ki'ilu lo toval klal." Why do we not understand this Mishnah to be saying that it's as if he didn't immerse himself at all? In which case, this part of the Mishnah would be saying clearly that if a person did not have the intention of immersing himself for the purpose of being able to eat chulin, then the immersion does not count at all. So we're back to square one, right? So Rav Nachman responds after the Gemara, Loi. That's not how you should understand the Mishnah. Rather, you should understand it as follows. You should read it as Ki'ilu le'tovel lemaisa. It's as if he did not immerse himself for Maisa Sheni. But Avol Tovel Chulin, it is effective for Chulin. Why is it effective for Chulin? It's effective for Chulin. It's effective for Chulin because Chulin doesn't need Kavanah. As we proved from the previous Mishnah that we mentioned about the guy who puts his hand into the channel, right, into the channel of water, and he only has intention to take the fruit. Nevertheless, it still counts. It still counts, even though he had no intention. So then how do you understand the Mishnah, our Mishnah? It's very simple. It's just like we understood what we said in the first part of the Mishnah, that when we say that person immersed for chulin and he had intention chulin, it's not good for Maisa. The second part of the Mishnah is saying the very same thing, that if he went in without any intention, it's not going to be good for Maisa, but it will be good for chulin. So now we say like this: Hu Sava, Rabbah thought, Dochi Komatchele, that Rav Nachman was merely pushing him off with a feeble response. It didn't seem like a very solid response. In other words, he wasn't sure whether that indeed was the case. But Nafak, he went out, he went and he investigated, Va'ashkach, and he discovered another brisa which says exactly what Rav Nachman says. What does it say in the brisa? The Tanya says in the brisa, If a person immersed himself and did not intend for tahara, then also lemaisa or mutar lachulin. It says explicitly that it's forbidden to eat maisa with this kind of immersion, but he is permitted to eat chulin. So what we have over here is a very clear ruling with regards to chulin. Chulin never needs to have kavana in terms of when you're washing or whether you're immersing into a mikvah, you can, it still counts. Now, it's important to understand, right, that we're talking over here about a parush. What is a parush? A parush, we said the parushim were the people who accepted upon themselves extra stringencies to eat even chulin b'tahara. They would eat even regular food with this tahara. So now it's important to realize that there's no chiyuv on anybody to eat chulin b'tahara, right? So when it says about going into a mikvah for chulin, there's no rabbinic enactment that a person has to go to mikvah for chulin. We're talking about a parush that who takes on an extra degree of stringency for himself, that if he goes into a pool of water that is kosher as a mikvah, and he didn't have in mind, the Chachamim are saying that it still counts for tahara, and when you who have taken upon yourself to eat chulin b'tahara come out of that pool, you can now go and eat that chulin and know that you yourself have achieved this level of tahara. So that's all to be said about that for now. So we said that that somebody who immerses himself with intention for a lower level of sanctity is considered to be tamei for all the higher levels of sanctity, right? So Rabbi Elazar says, here's an interesting rule. Toval, if a person immerses, va'Allah, and he came out of the mikvah, machzik atzmai l'chol ma sheyitzeh, he can, after coming out of the mikvah, have a kavana to purify himself for whatever level he wishes. In other words, he went into the mikvah to become tahar, but he didn't decide while he was in the mikvah what level of tahara he wants. When he comes out of the mikvah, he can still determine and say that I went into the mikvah for the tahara on the level of kodesh, for example, and then it's still valid. So frag the Gemara, I'm going to challenge this from a brisa. There's a brisa that says, if in a case where a person immersed into the mikvah, and then he is starting to leave the mikvah, and he still has 1 foot in the water, so we say, if he originally had the intention for a lesser stringent tahara, he can change his mind and he can have the kavana for a more stringent item. But that's only so long as he still has his feet in the water.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is that the reason we can say that is because we still consider him connected to the water? The water that's on his body is still connected to the water of the mikveh.
That is correct. I think it might be worthwhile at this point to stop for a minute and explain the concept of good achis and good asik, because these are concepts that are being applied over here, and it'll be a little bit clearer how they're being applied later on, but I want to explain it already from now. When I go into a mikvah, right, the reason why I become pure is because there's 40 saw, right, that I immerse into, okay? Now, when I leave the mikvah, right, essentially the water that is upon me is no longer attached to the water, all right, because it's on my head. It's not in the water. However, there's a concept of good achis, which means to extend and pull downwards. And this is like a halachic device that is used in areas like sukkah and mechitza, where we say that we imagine as if something stretches downwards to then complete the connection between one part and the other part, right? So in the case of this mikvah, for example, we're saying that because my feet are still in the mikvah, right? I am completely in the mikvah because the water that is on top of my head is still considered as being attached to the water that is in the mikvah itself. And so therefore, because I'm still considered to be in the mikvah completely, even though I've left most of my body, but I'm still attached. So therefore I consider good achis. I pull it downwards, that the water that's on top of my head is connected to the water inside the pool of water. That's why you could still change your mind, okay? Good asik is where we make an imaginary connection from what's below to above. So we extend it upwards. And the question is whether we do actually do that with regards to the waters, that we extend it upwards or not. And that's going to be with regards to another case that's coming later on. But I just wanted to mention those things at this point, now that Ezra brought it up. So we say that that if a person still has his foot in the water, then if he had intention for a lighter level of tahara, and he still has his foot in the water, he could change it to a more stringent one. But Allah, once he's come out totally, meaning he left the mikvah, shuvein machzik, now you can't have any intention for anything. So, frag the Gemara, right? My love ain't a machzik klal. Does this not mean that he cannot have any intention whatsoever, which would be a challenge to what Rebbe Lazar's ruling was before? Rebbe Lazar said that if I went into a mikvah, I had no intention, I come out and I am completely outside of the mikvah, I can now decide what that should count for. Here we're saying, once you leave the mikvah, you cannot have any intention. And for the Gemara, loy. But that's not how it should be understood. Oidehu, when the Mishnah is talking about while he still has a foot in the water, what's that coming to say? That's coming to say that afa pishuchzak, even though he had intention, is machzik, he can still change his mind for a more stringent tahara, right? Meaning to say that so long as he's still in the mikvah, he can change from a lower level to a higher level. But Allah, once he comes out from the mikvah, im lo yehuchzak, if he had not intended for any level, then machzik, he can still decide for any level that he wanted. But but if he had left and he had in mind, for example, chulin, and now he's out, then once you're out, since you already had an intention, you cannot change that intention. In other words, the only way having in mind any level of tahara would work once you're outside the mikvah is when you were in the mikvah, you had no intention at all. Not that you had no intention to become tahar, but you had no particular level that you were becoming tahar for. Okay? Because I think this makes sense to me, at least, that if I come and I go into a pool of water and I'm going there just to bathe, and then I come out and say, oh, you know what, I was just in the mikvah, and then I decide that should count for kodesh, I'm not sure that would work. That wouldn't work. It's only that I went in for a level for any. I'm sorry. I take that back. On a biblical level, mid'oraisa, when you go into a pool of water, you become tahar. You don't have to have any kavanah at all, right? Even for the highest level, it makes no difference. You entered into a kosher mikvah, you are now tahar. It's the rabbis who came along and made a special gezerah that you have to have intention. But they said it depends on what level you're trying to become tahar for. If it's for chulin, you don't have to have any intention. If it's for any of the higher levels, you have to have intention. And here, when we're talking about a guy coming up and then he can have in mind for whatever he wants, means that when a person did not initially have in mind for chulin, but he had in mind nothing, then if he's outside of the mikvah, Rebbe Lezer says that he could have in mind that it should account for anything. Whereas if he had something in mind when he initially went down, then once he's taken the last foot out of the water, he cannot change it. Okay. Any
Rabbi.
questions? Yes.
Yeah, I think Mordechai has a question.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this kind of also reminds me that if there are two people who go into a mikvah, that's exactly 40 saw, and one toifels and starts to leave the mikvah, and the other one's getting ready to toifel, just as long as the first person's feet are still in the mikvah. The second person is still good to toifel.
That's exactly what we're about to bring up now. That's the very next case. Fact the Gemara, man Tana, who's the Tana that taught this, who taught that if a person still has 1 foot in the water, that is regarded as if he's still immersing and that he can change his intention. Rav Ptus says, you want to know who the Tana is? Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda. How do I know? How do I know it's Rabbi Yehuda who says this? Because we've learned in the Mishnah, this is exactly what you were talking about, Mordechai. Mikvah shenimdat. If you have a mikvah that was measured, and it has exactly 40 saw, which is the minimum amount of water for a valid mikvah, and 2 people go and descend into the mikvah, and they immerse one after the other. In other words, one goes in first, and on his way out, somebody else comes in second, and he's about to go and immerse himself. So now, what's the halacha with regards to both of them? So we say, Harishon Tahor, the first guy who we just mentioned is Tahor, because he went into 40 saw that was exact, and it was perfect. But the second guy is going to be Tameh. Why is he going to be Tameh? Because the first guy leaving takes out some of the water with him, and so now it's no longer 40 saw. Now, that's according to who? The Tanakama. Tanakama, it says the first guy has had a valid immersion, second guy did not. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Im hoyu raglav shel rishon noigos b'mayim. If the feet of the first guy was still touching the water when the second guy was immersing himself, then the halacha is afasheni tahor. Then the second guy is also going to be tahor. Okay?
But
Now,
Rabbi,
yeah.
when they got into the mikvah, there was 40 saw, but for both of them.
Yes.
So they are both already dipped in
No.
the correct amount of water.
They
Why
haven't
not?
dipped yet.
Before anybody goes out.
No, they haven't dipped yet. When it comes to tefillah b'mikvah, until your entire body is completely immersed in the water, it doesn't count for anything. So
Okay, but both of them got in and dipped all the way.
No,
it says zeh achazer. It says it was zeh achazer. The Mishnah zeh achazer means one after the other. So he says
yeah, but the water didn't change yet. Nobody took water out.
No, but we're saying that if you go in one after the other,
Yeah.
when the first guy leaves, as he's
Before
leaving,
the first guy leaves, both of them are in the correct amount of water.
I understand.
no. That's not what it says. Basically, what's happening is you have the mikveh is at 40. The first guy goes in.
Yeah.
And he comes out. Then the second one goes in. That's what it says.
They're not going in together? They're not in the water together?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's my misunderstanding.
Yeah. So it's talking about zeh achazer. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, so long as the feet of the first one are still touching in the water, then we say that even though he's taken out some of the water on his body, but because the foot is still attached to the water, we consider that the water that's on his head and the rest of his body is still attached to the rest of the pool of water, and therefore the second guy is still tahor. Now, Amar Rabbi Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Abuah. Rabbi Nachman said in the name of Rabba Bar Abuah, Machloikais b'malois derabanan. This machlokes that we have over here, right, between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama and the Chachamim is only with regards to the extra stringencies of the Chachamim. In other words, to the cases where the person on a biblical level is tahar, and he's only immersing himself for what? To comply with an extra chumrah of the Chachamim. So then we have a machlekes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to the extra stringencies of the Chachamim, we're going to make a special leniency, and we'll say this idea of good achis, that we're going to imagine as if the water is still staying in the pool of water, and it's going to count for the second guy to have a valid immersion in the mikvah. However, but if we were going to be talking about two people who wanted to immerse to leave a real tumah, not an extra stringency from the Chachamim, but the tumah from a biblical level, and to become tar on a biblical level, then we say divrei hakol, that fasheni tumah, that according to everybody, even Rabbi Yehuda, right, would agree that the second guy is going to be impure. Why? Because we only allowed for this leniency of using the principle of good achis when it comes to the extra stringency of the gzeira of the Chachamim. However, when it comes to biblical, then we wouldn't accept it. V'hainu the Repedus, and this statement of Reb Nachman is in agreement with that with that of Reb Pedus, who says that that the Tana of the Mishnah that says that while a person's foot is still in the water, that person's foot who's still in the water is able to change his mind in terms of what level, right? The Tana is Rabbi Yehuda, and he's bringing this Mishnah as a support to that. So according to the way Rabbi Nachman is explaining this machlekes, right, between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, it all works. That it's only with regards to what? With the Rabbanan. But the Raisa, everybody would agree that the second guy is Tamei. However, Ike da Amrei, there are the people who have a different version of Rabbi Nachman's statement in the name of Rabbi Ba'avahu, which turns everything around. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Bo. This second version has Rabbi Nachman saying in the name of Rabbi Bo that what? Machloikas betumal tahara. When does the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda disagree with one another? They disagree with one another when it comes to Tumah Tahara, the Eraisa, right? That according to what? According to Rabbi Yehuda, even in the case of the Raisa, if the guy's foot is still inside the mikvah, it still counts, right? However, the Rabbanon, when it comes to the extra stringencies of the Rabbanon, divrei hakel afasheni tahor, then even the Chachamim, the Tanakama, would agree that the second guy is tahor. In other words, when is there machlekes whether it works or not? When it comes to things of a biblical nature, on the biblical level. But when it comes to higher stringencies because of the Chachamim, then everybody agrees. And if that would be the case, then this statement of Reb Nachman would disagree with Reb Pedos. Why would it disagree with Reb Pedos? Because according to Reb Nachman, right, according to this one, then the Brisa statement allowing it for a person's feet who was still in the mikvah to change his intent would be agreed upon by the Chachamim. Reb Petus said that it's only Rabbi Yehuda who can hold this, right? You understand what I'm saying? According to Reb Petus, he says the Tana of our Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yehuda because he's the only guy in this Mishnah that we're quoting about two guys going into the mikvah, one after the other, right? He's the only guy that holds that. But if you're going to come along and say that the machlekes is only with regards to a tumah that is on a biblical level, but on a tumah that's on a rabbinic level, even the Chacham would agree. Then, if that's the case, even the Chacham could be the ones who are of the opinion. They could be the authors of the Mishnah that says that while a person's foot is still in the mikvah, he could change his mind to which level of tahara. So far, so good? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go a little bit further. Ula. So Ula asked a question. Ula says, Rabbi Yechanan. He said, I asked from Rabbi Yechanan. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the question is, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that we say good achis. Okay? Good achis means that we assume that the water that is above extends downwards. So now we're going to try and explore whether we can take the principle of good asik and attribute that principle to the view of Rabbi Yehuda as well. And you're going to see how this works. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Mahu lahatpil mechotin v'tzinoirios b'roshei shel rishon. What is the law as far as immersing needles and spinning forks, which are very small, on the head of the first person while his feet are still in the water? In other words, before we're saying, does the water on the top extend down to the bottom to let the second guy have a valid immersion? Now we're asking the other way around. Do the bottom waters extend upwards to the head of the person? Like this is an imaginary extension, but do we have the waters from the bottom extend upwards to the head of the person so that although the person's head only has a minimal amount of water, but it's still, if we connect the bottom to it, then we say it's part of the 40 saw, then I could take a needle, for example, put it in this guy's hair that still has water there and say, I put it into the mikvah. That's the question. Everybody understand the question?
Yeah, if the water extends up all the way to the head.
Right. So that's the question. So we say, so here's the question. Good achis islil Rabbi. Do we say that Rabbi believes in the principle of good achis in the case of the mikvah, which means it extend and lower? That's what he accepts. But good asik, Leslie, but the idea of extending and raising it, he doesn't accept it. Or Dilma, or perhaps good asik nami islay. Could we possibly say that he does accept the principle of good asik as well? Amali. So he said to me, Rabbi Yechanan said to me, Tinisuha, you've learned the answer in a brisa. And I think what I'm going to do, because it's quite detailed, you have basically you have a mountain, and you have a ditch in one, and a ditch in another, and a ditch in another. In other words, on the same mountain, and it's a slope going down. And the first one has 20 saw, the second one has 40 saw, and the third one has 20 saw. And we want to know which one you can immerse in if they're all in an incline and the water might be flowing from one to the other. But because it's a little bit detailed, I think I'm going to leave it for tomorrow, and we'll pick up from here in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow morning, same time, same place.
Rabbi, quick question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good achis is extending downward, and good asik is extending upward.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Okay.
the 40 saw in the middle is okay, and the 20 on the bottom is okay.
It's not so simple. It's not so simple. We're going to say that the
Right.
bottom one's okay. But anyway, we'll
Okay.
talk about it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Probably.